Welcome, my friends, to a new episode of Frameworks. And in this episode, we're going to talk about a writing framework. We're going to talk about the product approach. So let's go through the stages of the product approach. And as usual, as I said before in the previous episodes, every framework in teaching should start with leading. Why? Because as we said, leading is the stage at which you attract your students' attention. And you cannot start a lesson without attracting students' attention, without grabbing their attention and making them interested. So now, how can we start with a good leading when we're talking about the product approach? Well, the most important thing is to think about your topic, what your topic is. And when I say topic, I'm talking here about the topic of the writing task. What is the topic of the writing task? Now you're going to watch a video that I recorded with my teachers. I was actually delivering an input session on the product approach. And what I wanted to do is to give them actually a kind of a demonstration where they see the product approach in action. Right, so this is what I did. I actually wrote an email, and my candidates are supposed now to read this email and to respond to it. Well, the email itself is actually sent from a teacher, and this teacher is complaining about his writing lessons, and he's asking his trainer for a piece of advice. Right, good. So now let's go to the leading and see how I started my leading with my candidates in this video. Let's go. Let me ask you a question. What are the problems that usually face you when you're teaching writing? One by one, yes? You didn't teach writing before? Okay. Okay, can you raise the voice?
We didn't try anything out to practice writing before.
Yeah, like you yourself as a teacher, you don't write much, Grammar is a problem. But I'm talking about, is it a problem for you when you're teaching writing?
Yes.
Because I'm talking about teaching here. No, I'm talking about the problems, yes, that would face you when you're teaching writing.
The steps of teaching.
The stages and...
Yes, the stages.
I used to follow the same way that I've been taught, which is asking the students only write a paragraph 4 sentences about this teacher. Okay. So students start writing only one or two sentences and stop. They can't write anymore. So I start giving them some ideas to complete writing those sentences they are required to write.
So you just jump to the writing part.
The writing part, yeah. That's why I'm here. I want to know how to teach this part.
I've never followed this
It's very
strategy.
difficult for the students to write so many sentences about a topic, generating ideas and writing only, they both write separate words having so many grammatical mistakes. So start correcting them and asking them to rewrite what they have written.
Thank you so much, yes. What about you, Paul?
Unfortunately, I have never used the strategies to teach writing. Only write a paragraph, write an email, without giving any instructions about that.
So just,
although it's an important skill, but we did it randomly.
Okay.
So, yes,
you want to add something? Yes, how to get parents during the writing.
How to teach coherence and cohesion. Okay. Now, as you saw, this was a teacher-centered leading. Well, no problem. Sometimes your leading can be teacher-centered and it can be student-centered. If I wanted this previous leading to be student-centered, I would have asked my students to discuss together and talk about the problems that face them when they're teaching writing at their schools. But I didn't do this. I started with a teacher-centered leading. Well, fair enough. Now, after leading, the second stage in the product approach is what we call reading. Now here comes a good question. Someone might ask, Shadi, why do we have a reading stage in a writing lesson? And the answer would be, when you are asked to write something that you haven't written before, like imagine that you want to apply for a job, and then you were told that you have to write your CV and a cover letter. Well, maybe you've got your CV ready, but you've never heard of a cover letter before. You don't know how to write a cover letter. What do we usually do? We go to Google, we write a cover letter, then a cover letter would pop up, and then what we do is that we look at how a cover letter is written, and then we write something like it. So simply, we look at an example. This is actually the purpose of the reading stage in the product approach. It is to provide your candidates, it is to provide your students with an example. A written example of what you want them to produce by the end of the lesson. And that's why we call it the product approach, because you are given example of the product you want your students to produce by the end of the lesson. Now, and as I said, because I want my candidates to write an email responding to this teacher's problems by the end of the lesson, so that was my reading stage. So let's see how I ran this stage with my candidates. Let's go to this video. So now I've got here an email. This email was sent to me by an English teacher, and she's facing a problem with teaching writing. She's facing a problem with teaching writing, right? I want you to read the email carefully, right? What are her main problems? So that's what I want you to answer. Read it and tell me what her main problems are. Ready? Let's do that. Now, as you saw, all I've done is that I gave them copies from that letter that I prepared myself, and I gave them a question to think about. Okay? The problems that are facing the teacher. What the problems that are facing the teacher are. Now, of course, I couldn't have given them that email and asked them, hey, I want you to read this email. No, you can't do that. You've got to give students a reason why they should read. And my reason here was asking them to read so that they can find out the problems facing this teacher. Remember, you can never ask your students in a classroom to read or listen without a purpose. And a purpose is a task, a question. Right. Now, so we have the leading stage. And then we have the reading stage. After that, we've got a stage that we call genre analysis. Now, what is genre analysis? Genre is a type of writing. And genre analysis means that this is the time when the teacher needs to analyze this type of writing that his students need to do by the end of the session. And this is one of the most important stages in this approach. Why? Because that's the teacher's job. It is your time now. And in genre analysis stage, you need to cover two things. Number one, ideas. Number two, language. Now someone might say, Shadi, should we cover both ideas and language? I said, no. you shouldn't cover both. It depends on what your students need. So if they need ideas and they need language, then yes, you should cover both. If they only need ideas, then fair enough, give them only ideas. If they need only language here and they have a lot of ideas about the topic, then focus on language. Now, let's see how I'm going to run my genre analysis stage. Let's watch that video together. Okay, now, what I want you to do, imagine yourself as a trainer. I don't want you to answer the email, but at least write points, okay, that you will cover when you are writing an email back to her. So are you going to write an email? No, just bullet points of what you will cover in terms of advice. Okay, go on. Okay, my friends, now I want you to check the points you have with your partner. So instead of having only 3 or 4 points, you can have more points. So I want the 3 of you working together, and the 3 of you together, and the 4 of you together. So my friends, what points should we cover when we are responding to this email? Like point number 1. Okay, so we need to cover something related to leading. Okay. The what? Approach, talk about the approach. The stages then. So we need to talk about stages.
We need to talk about also like the useful language you teach stage.
Okay, the useful language.
And ideas as well. Selecting topics.
Ideas. And selecting?
Selecting topics that we are thinking about.
Selecting topics.
Correcting.
Error correcting.
Error correction.
Error correction.
Yeah, keep that.
Now, look at this, my friends. When we write an email like this one, we would need to give advice, and we will also need to express our opinions. So I need someone to help me now. What kind of expressions or terms can we use to express opinions? What kind? Yeah. I need only 2, I think, and? Okay. What about giving advice? Okay. Something else? It's recommended.
You ought to.
Okay, only 2. Now, what I want you to do, my friends, I want you to draw this chart on an empty sheet of paper, and I want you to add to each column at least 4 more expressions. 4 expressions, okay, or phrases to express opinions, and 4 more phrases to give advice. Go on right now. So, how many will you add in each column? 4. Thank you so much. Go on. Now, my friends, I want you to work with your partners. Now, instead of having only 4, you can increase what you have to 5 or 6 or 7, right? So, go on, work together. Here, together. Partner. Righty then. So, now, what can we add here to this column, suppressive opinions?
From my point of view.
Okay. From my point of view. Okay. What else?
And I reckon.
I reckon. Okay. In my opinion. Okay. That would be advice, eh? If I were you, I would.
Yes, no shoe.
If I were you, should.
Yeah, better. You are better.
You're better, okay?
Yes. It's advisable.
I would suggest, okay?
It's advisable to
It's advisable,
or not to.
okay? Right, so one
Not
of
to have to.
yeah, why not? Like strong advice.
Yes.
So I drew this chart on the board where they have two columns. One column is for expressing opinions and the other column is for giving advice. And this was the language I knew my candidates would need when they're writing their email. Now, let's move after that to the most important task, which is the writing task. And let's watch that video and see what happened. Okay, now, so my friends, now we've got ideas to cover and you've got some examples of the language you can include in your email. It is time now to write an email giving advice to this teacher. Okay, we've got 15 minutes to do that on my stopwatch. To write an email giving advice to this teacher and expressing your opinions. Okay, off you go. Start. Now, as you saw in the video, it's very important to give your candidates, your students, enough time during the writing task, because this is your main aim. This is why you've been doing all the previous steps. This is why you started with a leading. This is why you moved to reading. This is why you moved to genre analysis. It is because you want to prepare your students for the writing task. So you should be giving them enough time to do it. Now, after the writing task, you need to give feedback. And as we said in the previous episodes, feedback is of two kinds. Content feedback, which is related to ideas. Language feedback, which is related to accuracy. Now, let's see how I did. Now, what I want you to do, I want every two to be checking, okay, one on the board, okay? Once you finish it, move to the other one, okay? Whenever I clap my hands, we move around. So both of you here, okay? Now both of you here, yes, here, and you can go here. When I clap my hands, you move around. 3, 2, 1, go. Move to the right. Now, as you saw in the video, I focused on content feedback by using a gallery walk activity. So I started hanging my students writing on the board, and then they move around, they check the emails, they read them, they discuss together. So I used peer feedback so that the students feel that their emails are appreciated. Now someone might say, Shadi, what's the point of getting the other students to read their friends' emails? And I would say, remember that in real life, when we write an email, people do not respond to our grammar or vocabulary by correcting their mistakes. No, even if your email has grammar mistakes and vocabulary mistakes, people usually respond to the message as long as it is clear. So how would you feel if you write an email to someone asking for help or advice, and then all what this person does is writing back to you, commenting on your grammar and vocabulary? I'm sure you'll feel annoyed. So you should be also fair with your students, and you should give them a replica of what real life is all about. You should prepare them for real life. And in real life, people don't respond to grammar mistakes and vocabulary as long as the message is clear. So out of respect, out of being a sensitive teacher, you have to respond to the content first. Make them feel happy about what they have written. And then yes, later you can focus on inaccuracies and you can help them with that as well. But I don't believe it should come first. Now, someone might say, Shadi, then how do we go on about language feedback? Now, in language feedback, you have two ways of doing it. You can give your students collective feedback or personalized feedback. Now, in order to choose one of them, you have to ask yourself one question. How much time do I have? If you have enough time, then personalized feedback would be great, which means that you can collect your students' writing, and then you start putting your comments on every task, and then you give the tasks back to your students. Fair enough. That is personalized language feedback. Now, collective language feedback is for teachers who don't have a lot of time. Then what you do is you start going through all your students' written tasks, and then you collect the common mistakes, the most important mistakes, and then you put them on one sheet of paper, and then you take this back to your students, and then they work as a whole class on correcting these mistakes. And of course you have to be sensitive when doing this, like don't mention anywhere on the paper who made such mistakes. Like this should not be mentioned, of course. Now, when it comes to personalized feedback and collective feedback, there are two ways of doing this. You can give your students an indirect feedback, or you can give them a direct feedback. Now, what is the difference? In indirect feedback, all what you do is that you correct students' mistakes directly and you give them back the tasks. So they have everything corrected, they look at it, they see what happened. Like one student wrote, I have seen the match, and then you correct it, you say, I have seen, and then that's it. So you've done it yourself as a teacher. Okay, well, the beauty of this kind of feedback, that it is simple, it is clear, and is one time. Now, my favorite is indirect feedback. And in indirect feedback, we get students to correct themselves. How? By using correction codes. What are correction codes? These are codes you agree on with your students in the classroom. So for example, for grammar mistakes, you write G. For vocabulary mistakes, you write V. For word order mistakes, you write WO. Whatever. For tense mistakes, you write T. For punctuation, you write P. For prepositions, you write PR. It depends, you know. I mean, you can come up with your own correction code as you want with your students. Now, when you come up with your own correction code, now you're not going to correct your students' mistakes. No, if there is a problem with something like I have C the match, all what you will do is write G. So your student, when he looks at the paper, he understands that this is a grammar mistake. But the disadvantage of this approach, that students would need to come back to you with their correction. Well, the disadvantage of the previous approach is the direct one, that you might correct your students' mistakes, but maybe they would take that and they don't look at it. It happens. They don't look at your correction. So every style has its own advantages and disadvantages. So now, my friends, the product approach. 5 main stages. Leading, that's number 1. Reading, that's number 2. Genre analysis, that's number 3. And then we have the writing task, the writing stage, and finally feedback. So 5 main stages in the product approach. Thank you very much for watching this video. This was Shadi Abu Yusuf from British Training Center. And remember, don't forget to follow my YouTube channel. And also, don't forget the coming episode. We're going to talk about the product approach in course books. Thank you so much. See you again. Bye.